Okay, so we're ready to start the next session, AR Impact on Society and Culture. For this, our normal presenter wasn't able to come in, or the panel moderator, so instead we have Brian, who's taking over, so thanks for doing that last minute. I'll go ahead and turn it over to Brian. So.
All right, thanks a lot, Damon. My name is Brian Wassom. I am an officer and legal counsel to AugmentedReality.org. I'm a lawyer practicing in Detroit, Michigan, and I will also be moderating the next panel after this one on law and IP and ethics, so stick around for that. But Joe Rampolla, right, we have him actually down here. He did drag himself out of bed and make it to the conference today. He unfortunately got struck with a variety of illnesses last night and had lost his voice as a result. So he is there white knuckled and wishing he could be up here because he spent so much time and energy with these speakers, gathering the panel and working with them to make a presentation here. But the panelists are still an exciting bunch of futurists and leaders in this industry, and all have unique insight into the topic for today, which is the future of augmented reality and its impact on society and culture. So with us we have, to my immediate left, we have Noah Zerkin, hardware R&D at the SuperTouch Group. Most of you probably are familiar with all of these individuals from their content online, Noah especially. A researcher and interactive consultant and an AR hardware professional. You're at the SuperTouch Group presently? Okay. And next to him, we have Dr. Stephen Feiner, an augmented reality pioneer and professor of computer science at Columbia University, an award-winning research and visionary in his own right. Next to him, we have Greg Kipper, a futurist and author, professional speaker, cybersecurity professional, and co-author, along with Joe Rampolla of ARDirt.com, of the Augmented Reality Emerging Guide, Technology's Guide to AR, which you can find for sale on the AWE store table out in the first floor reception area. And then Mark Goodman couldn't make it on our panel today. He was originally scheduled, also came down ill. But Tish Shute, who you're all familiar with, has graciously agreed to take his place on the panel and offer her own very experienced perspective on this subject. She is, as you know, a reality architect and innovation and strategist and interaction designer. With the Stupid Fun Club most recently, and now with Sintertainment, working with Will Wright and a host of other visionaries in this field. So thank you to the panel for joining us and offering this discussion. Now, I want to start with any discussion of the future and where things are going, trends involving AR and how it's developing, has to start somewhere, and it has to start with an understanding of where we are. And the trends that have been shaping the development of AR to date. So, Dr. Feiner, I thought maybe I'd start with you with your years of experience in computer science and the development of AR. What's your perspective on where AR is now and the trends that have been motivating it and driving it to date?
Okay. Wow, that's a really big question. I'm not sure I was prepared to answer such a big question. So, where are we now? What are the trends that are driving AR? I could probably go on and on and on, sort of extemporizing and trying to figure out what I'm going to leave out. I like to think of things in context of things that came before. And so when I talk about AR, and sometimes people will even accuse me of being sort of like the first person to do AR, which is total nonsense. And I like to point out, I started doing AR in 1990-91. And if you actually look at the very first AR and you subtract that year from today's date and divide by 2, you basically get around 1991. The first work was done by Ivan Sutherland in work that obviously was done before the 1968 paper that he published, which discussed a fully stereoscopic optical see-through head-worn display tracked by a mechanical tracker. They also had a really interesting ultrasonic tracker that was wireless but didn't quite work all that well, and did, because it was so early in the history of graphics, vector graphics that was then overlaid on the world. So, I mean, that's 45 years ago, which is just amazingly impressive if you think about, how little was done, but not zero, how little was done before the work that started to pick up on that in the 80s and 90s work that included stuff at UNC Chapel Hill, for example, work that included stuff that was being done in the military, to be able to overlay graphics, mostly graphics, on one's field of view. So it's, I think, very important to keep a lot of perspective on how far back the history goes for things that we do now. Bill Buxton likes to talk about the long nose of innovation, the idea that things you think of as being fairly recent actually had origins in things that were much, much older. And while I can talk about AR and say 1968, there will probably even be people who will say things like, well, you know, if you go back hundreds of years before that, then they won't be talking about computers, but they will talk about things that basically augmented in some ways the things that you experienced. So I think having that kind of historical context is very, very important. So where are we right now? Well, and it's an old quote, and I'm not going to be able to really get this one right. It's due to Mark Twain, who said something about how, you know, thinking about that we're kind of like, you know, so far advanced and you know, how important we are as human beings and the things that we do is a little bit like thinking about, say, the Eiffel Tower being there only to support the sort of very top layer of paint on the top of the ball at the very top of it. There's just so many exciting things, I think, that we're not able to do right now that we'd like to be able to do, things that we have made sketches of, in some cases, in the case of sci-fi writers, ones that were flights of fancy. In others, in the case of neat things like that very early Sutherland head-worn display, things that were actually realized in a lab, but which takes so much effort to bring beyond that. And so, for example, if I went back before the work that Ivan Sutherland did in 1968, if I went back to a really wonderful paper called The Ultimate Display that he published in 1965, in which he talked about the idea of a room in which you could walk that had the ability to literally make things out of matter on the fly. So you could make a chair and then be able to sit in that chair, not just look at it. And then he went on to talk about handcuffs that would be confining and bullets that would be fatal, very morbid kinds of imagery. But if we look at science fiction, for example, there are wonderful stories like The Welt, for example, which date back well before then, that are the notion of a room in which interesting things can happen that, well, I don't want to spoil the story for you. But,
well, Dr. Feiner, you mentioned and science fiction and the number of possible futures that different authors, different creators, and inventors have envisioned at this point. And I'd like to use that as a segue to transition to our topic, really, for today, which is the future and where that future is actually going to end up. And each of our keynote speakers, for example, has shared a vision where they see AR headed. So yesterday, if you heard Will Wright's keynote, he talked about AR as a means of adding beauty to the world and not just using the world as another platform to browse the internet. Steve Mann this morning spoke of augmediated reality as taking us away from these digital overlays, things that where the technology began, and bringing it into an interactive process where we help to see not just more on top of the world, but see the actual world better. So each one of these panelists is a futurist, working to make one or more of those alternate realities or possible realities actual. So I'd like to ask each of them, starting with Noah and then going down the road, how do you see AR? If you want to just summarize, obviously we could each of you give an in-depth presentation for the entire period of time that we have. How would you summarize your vision of AR, of where it's going and how it will manifest itself?
Well, in terms of where AR is going in the immediate future, I mean, I see sort of three branches here, all with different social implications. Wearables, I think, sort of encompass two relevant things, one being life logging, and then the other being actual augmented reality, which then I think branches into two two separate sort of subfields, one being contextual overlay that enhances what we see, the other being more of a fantastic medium which allows us to tailor the reality around us to what we would have it be. And I think that while these will be integrated, they're sort of distinct for the time being. And let's see where it's going. There are going to be niche applications, industrial applications that utilize the hardware that we have right now. Maybe niche consumer adoption for gaming, location-based gaming, and then eventually gaming that does actually integrate registered graphics into our environment. And the life logging thing is already, it's already
Sure.
completely viable. And I think we're going to see, large multi-user, augmented channels overlaid over the world. Some curated probably by, larger entities in the way that video game companies sort of curate the content of massively multiplayer worlds, and then some that are more user-created channels that are maybe a little more chaotic, something like Second Life, where people are contributing their own things in a more collaborative way rather than having a curated experience.
So you see recording and overlaid displays, overlaid content is the direction we're going. Dr. Feiner, which of those possible realities that you mentioned do you see as being the most likely?
I'm going to take a much more general approach to the answer. I think of just anything that you would do in normal life, whether you're doing it in private, whether you're doing it in public, and think about what advantage you might have to have additional information, additional insight to the things around you provided to you through some or one or more of your senses. A lot of what we talk about is visual, but AR isn't restricted to the visual. It can be auditory, it can be haptic, it could be even gustatory and olfactory. And so are there things you can add to your experience that would be useful? And mostly we concentrate, of course, in a lot of the stuff that you're going to see on the exhibition floor and in the talks people talk about. A lot of it is going to be visual. We're very largely a visual society. Of course, there are people who can't see and who need to have their environment augmented in other ways. But my guiding way of looking at this is think about something that you do and think about what information, what things that would be useful for you to know about it, and how you might provide that information, let's just talk about visual right now, to someone in context. Some of those things are going to be registered on your environment. You might walk up to someone. I, for example, have a lot of trouble remembering faces. I'm probably never going to be a natural politician. And I would love to be able to have a system that could recognize someone's face, remind me if I know that person, remind me of the context of the conversation, and be able to sound like someone who's much better at this than I really am, and shake their hand as opposed to trying and say their name as opposed to trying to avoid figuring out a way to not have to say their name because I don't remember it.
I know I can relate to that as well.
So there's
Greg?
lots of things like that where little amounts of information can really help.
Okay, good. Greg, we haven't heard from you. What's your vision?
Well, AR is simply one of the emerging technologies, and while it is important, I guess the crux of my view for AR for the future is it is going to be the interface for the Internet of Things. This is a transitional interface, much like, roll back the clock, we went from the graphical user interface to the command line interface to the graphical user interface, and that changed everything. We're using them constantly today, and one of my favorite ways of putting it is imagine trying to do Photoshop in a command line interface. It just doesn't translate. It's not going to work. There are certain things that augmented reality will bring to the world that will be beyond the constraints of the graphical user interface. So it's heading that direction, and with mobility and the ability for sensors and just the raw computational power, storage power, and bandwidth that we have at our capability, we have all of this just this massive pool of resource that we can go, okay, now where do we want to take this? And AR is arriving right when it's supposed to. Say, okay, now we can see the world in a new way and make it very personal. And as we've seen from this conference, every person has their own insights as to what they want AR to be, what they want it to do for them. Do you want it for entertainment? Do you want it for marketing? Do you want it for education, maintenance? So I foresee that all of this will play out. And I don't necessarily think that any of it will be wasted, because it will come down to how each individual wants to use it. Much like all of you have, Macs and PCs right now, and each one of them, while it is the same foundational system, it's customized to you and used in a very particular way.
Okay, Tish?
Well, I like this frame that people have been using recently, the Wearable Revolution, because I think it's a good high order frame to start with. And I think you have to start in very big categories, because this is a big revolution. So in the business category, and I'm drawing from things said in this conference, Tomi just made the big point. From a business standpoint, this is not another form factor for the internet. No. And that's what makes it so big. Right now, we're seeing that, and we're seeing the incumbents of the internet, the 4 computers where all of our data goes, worrying very deeply about the fact that mobile didn't turn out to be another form factor on the internet. So why is this so big? It means right now that, yes, I mean, it's so awesome that Google have, gone out there and done the Glass project, because that kind of validates the space. But I mean, in fact, by validating the space, they really have opened up this opportunity for 1,000 flowers to bloom. And it's an opportunity that's not in the mobile space, because even though it was not the internet, it's very hard if you're in the app business to know how to break through the lock of the, 2 big distribution, Google and Apple. There's not a lot of blue sky there. But in wearables, I mean, really, how this is going to pan out is almost impossible to predict. And I recently moved to San Francisco. I live in the dog patch in San Francisco, and I'm in the center of what I see as the hardware revolution, which will enable this new, the wearable revolution to take place. Because what's happened, and we've seen it now even with simple things like, the Dodo case. I mean, it doesn't have to be connected, just to sort of see that someone can come up with a concept and take it to mass market through things like Kickstarter and Indiegogo. So basically, users are now beginning to speak back to hardware and say, well, we want this product, we want that product. And that enables the kind of quick cycles of iteration for this wearable revolution that will give the opportunity to small players. It's really an opportunity space now for the wearable, and obviously eyewear is huge in this. Eyewear as a hardware problem is right at the top of the stack. I'm good friends with a lot of people who are, trying to sort of build up the sort of AWS for hardware, and I'm good friends with Nick Pinkston. He helped me do the hardware startup competition, and he knows all about manufacturing. He says, oh yes, eyewear, very hard, and we're not going there for a couple of years. It might be longer. But that's on the business side. That is massive. That is like, I mean, if you see me this conference, I'm super excited. I can hardly contain myself, because this is like the dawn of the internet. And we've waited a long time. Very exciting. Okay, socially, basically, Steve Mann has written the book on it. It's about living better. It's not about the killer app. It's about no app. It's about the anti-app. It's about really having a different way to live with computing. I love you had an image up with the last piece was people hunched over a screen. Amber Case has talked about this conference. Ben Savini's talked about it. So, the other thing that's huge, and of course all of these are unanswered questions, because as we try out these new expressions of this, we have so many, has anyone not been to Eyewear Alley yet in the expo? And not tried on all of the different things? Has anyone not been to Steve Mann's exhibit? You must do that. It's really important. You may not get another chance to see this collection ever. And Dr. Feiner, Professor Feiner,
Steve.
has contributed to this, and so a number of other people. It is really important, because if you want to play this game, you need to understand the history. And it's here, it's gathered here. It may not be gathered again for a while. I don't know when this collection will be on show again, because it's very different ways. I mean, Steve talked about it, these generations of how how these wearables are developing, and they have different social implications. The talk, I think, because you can go back and look at the videos, that's why I'm pinging on talks, because I'll talk all night if I go, I need to be brief. But listen to Ben Cervini's talk on the whole data aspect of this, because think about it. It's a social and cultural issue about what we want to see and how do we want to see a space. I mean, if you imagine this space augmented for our group, we have a very different idea of what that means than from the health conference that is just 2 doors down from, well, they're down in a few other rooms over here. So that's really important. But I think, I don't want to go on any further, but I think if you listen back to these videos and watch these videos carefully and understand this as a wearable revolution, and try and just not think of, other frames, and try and think and listen to the speakers, where they're pointing.
See, you raise a good point, Tish, which is that there are so many different iterations of eyewear now to choose from, and Steve Mann just laid out for us the different generations. He calls them generations 1 through 5 of different ways to wear glasses in eyewear, and whether they're here hovering over your eye or they're at point of eye, as he describes it, which is right in front, and actually mediating that perception of reality. Steve, you share with us your perception on what it's going to take for eyewear to become maximally have maximum utility for us, and what format that it's likely to manifest itself in.
Okay, so you're asking a technologist a question about how to make things get adopted in a sort of a mass adoption way. I'm not sure that's really the best question for me to try to answer, but I'll try to answer it anyway. Okay?
Well, I know that you have a viewpoint from the technology aspect of making this happen. Then I want to hear from Greg, your view on what it takes for mass adoption from a societal perspective.
So actually, my take on mass adoption is mostly a social one, because I think you need to have both a technology that is going to be sufficiently comfortable and usable, and as well also a set of potential adopters who are comfortable with the idea of wearing something like that. I mean, if you look at things like, for example, earbuds, if you went back in time decades before the generation of people very comfortable wearing earbuds, you found people like me when I was a kid, and I had headphones when I was a little kid. They were, I think, Koss or Super X or one of those companies that might not even exist anymore, and they were very, very big and bulky and kind of weird looking, and they hurt after a while. And it took certain kinds of technologies, like the creation of really small, really powerful magnets, to be able to make little teeny tiny things, and then be able to make them in a way that made them relatively inexpensive. And once you get to that point, when you've got something that's very small, very comfortable, and doesn't necessarily look exactly like people normally wear, which is typically nothing in their ear, then you can make something that not only makes it something where you're not going to feel weird, but you might actually feel like cool, right? And people might look at you and go, oh, that person's wearing earbuds. I wonder whether it's connected to, pick the name of the product that might be very cool at the time, right? So I think having something that looks kind of like regular, quotes, regular glasses, remembering that you can go into an eyeglass store and there's thousands of different designs to choose from, so I'm not sure what regular means. But having something that looks kind of like regular glasses, kind of like what I'm wearing, for example, but maybe has a little sexy lump or bump or something that a really good industrial designer has made look like something that's much more desirable than the kinds of things that a more pragmatic engineer would make, you can then have something that people will look at and go, gee, that's really cool looking.
Well, that makes sense. Greg, is it going to take Apple to come out with a product in order for us to adopt it on a mass scale?
Apple's certainly a contender. to carry from your point, Steve, he's absolutely right. It's got to be something that is comfortable, and it's got to be affordable. I mean, we look at the easiest comparison is the mobile phone revolution, and having watched that and having had some background as far as even crime fighting from mobile phones and how they were used and how society shifted in using that and saying, oh no, I wasn't there, I didn't do this, oh really, why is there a text message on your phone that says, if I can't have you, no one can, and your GPS coordinates? So all of these kind of things have made the adoption possible. I do believe Apple will make a rise forward. I think what Google Glass is doing is great from a standpoint. But on a much bigger context, 2 points. First, technologically, we are in a transition era. We are arriving at the end of what is called the fifth techno-economic revolution. This is the dwindling down period of the IT revolution. We had the microchip, we had the PC, we had the internet, we had sensors everywhere. Now we're starting to get into robotics and automation. All of this technology that has been maturing for almost the last 45, 50 years is going to carry us forward into the genetics, nanotechnology, and robotics. Now, the nanotech side will, of course, change the materials ability radically. We think AR contact lenses are challenging now. There will come a point where they won't be. There will come a point where the bionic eye is commonplace. And yeah, okay, now you'll have that subcult that says, all right, I want my meat eye taken out and I want my bionic eye put in. And then augmented reality is incidental at that point. That's just a feature. So technologically, what we're trying to do with the wearable computers and everything is we're pushing that step forward, going, all right, can we break into the sixth wave where it will change the rules drastically? And we pictures circle around the internet of 25 years ago, a guy holding a boom box and a camera and this, that, and another, and just a mountain of equipment going, now this fits in your iPhone. We're going to have that same moment where, yeah, remember Google Glass? Ha ha ha. It'd be like, wearing a motorcycle helmet all the time as opposed to I just popped it into my eye. The adoption will come from another key aspect, which is what's called the connected generation, or Generation C. And you can Google this to find out more about this particular emerging generation, pretty much born after 1990. And it has been tracked and they have been watched that they think fundamentally different than any preceding generation. And this is very significant because they no longer really expect privacy and they value openness. In my generation and earlier, we think about times of like 9/11 and privacy and everything like that, and there's still that, that ingrained sense of, I don't want to share this. They're like, we don't care, we're putting it out there. And I'm firmly convinced there's going to be a multi-million-dollar industry of when these kids turn into adults, going back, can you kind of clean up my Facebook profile and all that stuff that I posted on Twitter? The cleanup crew for that is going to be unreal. But they are going to be the ones that really take this forward because they're completely comfortable with mobiles. They have devices all over the place, and it's completely seamless. And I even specialize in this, and I still have trouble keeping up with my kids doing some of these things. So they're going to be the ones that carry this forward, and as this converges to make it easier to use, more comfortable, as it becomes part of pop culture, hey, this is what all the kids are wearing in school now. It'll become fashion. That's what will take it forward, and we're going to watch it happen. This is not something we can actually stop at this point. I don't know who the market leaders are going to be, but they will emerge. Obviously, Google and Apple have enough cred and enough money that they will hold true to it. There will certainly be the bursts of brilliance that come out, and then of course somebody will absorb them and take credit. But it will happen. So
that's excellent context to understand this relatively narrow topic of AR that we're talking about, how it fits in both technologically and demographically. Generations, yeah, we're running out of letters to label generations with. I'd like to pivot to a different type of technology, but Tish, did you have something to add?
I just wanted to add to that because I think what's very interesting is that the frame of the generation 1 to 5, and if you notice, Google is on generation 1, and they've done a wonderful job, and they will continue, and that will become probably very well adopted and hugely popular. Look who was on Generation 5. Generation 5 is a startup in Y Combinator. That is big. That is not insignificant, because this process of the software revolution that has produced companies like Pinterest that escalate to being a world, a mass phenomenon in less than a year and a half, come through a very well understood process. This process of iteration, the process of accelerators like Y Combinator, is finely tuned. And to see that process now possible to be applied to AR eyewear, I'm like, I can hardly contain myself. I should say this is not my job. I do not I'm not producing eyewear, I'm not producing hardware. I am just like, I see a revolution. I'm living as part of the world and a part of the city where it's happening around me, and it's mind-boggling. So the fact Meta will how you have to go after. Google cannot go after Generation 5. It is not possible any more than they could produce Pinterest or Facebook could produce Instagram. They have to acquire Instagram. They can't produce that. And Meta is now able to apply this process of rapid iteration where design comes from the community. If you know, Pinterest is a wonderful example to see how they designed how you would perform that app through building the design experience carefully through these, communities of design before it's released to the public. Now, that's how these problems can be solved in Generation 5. Google can't even think about that now because they're not part of that process any more than they could produce Instagram.
Sure. So this democratization of hardware that you're describing is another big trend, a big societal trend that, combined with the demographic view of privacy, is making it enormously difficult to predict exactly where this is all going to fall out. Of course, as Steve, you mentioned earlier, the visual sense is only one of our 5 senses. When we talk about augmented reality, we talk about digitizing our experience of the physical world, which comes through all 5 senses. And visual is what we focus on. But there's only so much interaction and thus utility that this data that we're visualizing can have, unless we can interact with it in a natural way. And we've heard this morning from Steve Mann about natural user interfaces. And one of the most natural ways that we have to interact with things that at least appear to us to be physical is through our hands. And Noah, I know that you have experience working on haptic AR, or at least hand gestures, gestural interaction with augmented content. And so I'd like to ask you your vision of where you think that technology is headed.
Well, first off, I wanted to note, just on the last point, if I may,
sure.
Just that the feasibility of all of this, what we're seeing, what we're going to see, really is the product of a convergence of complementary technologies that are advancing at, and miniaturizing at exponentially accelerating rates. And so we're, if you look at the progress in terms of image sensors, inertial sensors, being able to have an entire IMU on a inertial measurement unit in a single package that's 4 millimeters on a side, to use the example of an InvenSense chip. ST is also making really impressive tiny little chips, and these capabilities are becoming commodity pieces that can be integrated by just about anyone with a little know-how. And I guess optics really are still the big challenge, but the rest of the pieces are coming together from lots and lots and lots of people, not just specific integrators, and these advances are complementing each other to make this possible. As far as gestural interfaces go, I like depth cameras are really integral to all of this, and I certainly like being able to reach out in front of you and interact with things that are directly within your field of view. I don't think it's the be-all, end-all. I'm also, while it's a passable interface, I'm not the hugest fan of this. I guess I I'm not going to go into detail on the device that I'm making right now, but it's a pretty simple. Actually, no, it's a really basic, just human interface device where you can hold your hand at your side and use simple wrist gestures to move a cursor around like you would a mouse. And I don't know how useful that will be to people, but I think it might be a viable interface modality. I've built data gloves. Those are interesting. I don't think people are going to wear gloves, though. The main problem that I see with holding your hands out in front of yourself as your primary interface is the age-old, gorilla arm effect. You get tired. And so I think for more day-to-day interactions, it's important to have sort of an alternative interface that, if it isn't, a thought-based interface, which we'll get to, that it needs to be sort of a very subtle gestural interface, and that could take many, many forms, that doesn't require you to wave your hands around in front of your face, though that does have a place, and it's important.
You heard it here first, what Noah's working on. I think both Steve and Greg, I think, want to jump in on this topic. Greg?
I had one follow-up thought to that, because you're absolutely right. The challenge with the wearables, the way we interact in gesture-based interfaces, it's a common phenomenon when something new like this comes out that's what everybody wants to focus on. How many ways can I use it? And suddenly the rest of the interfaces that we've been using previously seem to be temporarily forgotten. The simple fact of the matter is let's say we have our wish list for AR and gesture-based interfaces right now. We have Star Trek. We have exactly what we want. It does everything perfectly. We're still not going to get rid of our keyboards and mice. We're still not going to get rid of our monitors. And in some instances, we're not going to get rid of command line interface because they still have a use depending on what we want to do it for. So, and Joe and I have talked about this, and I even think we said it in the book, of the last thing in the world I would want to have done is write this book in AR. I want a keyboard. I want to sit there, I want to think, I want to feel keys, I want to slow down. So, right, there's certain aspects where, yeah, you will see people doing this and interacting, but it will be a very brief thing. It's not, I'm going to sit here and hammer out an email in the middle of air. I'm going to, let me do Photoshop and, let me render this movie. The interface will suit the purpose. So while it's definitely important to create it for the needs that we have, it's also important to remember that all of these other interfaces that we've had will remain with us, and we will use them accordingly based on our needs. We're not going to go, okay, this is all I've got now. My keyboard's gone. It's part of why I think the laser projected keyboards haven't really caught on in a great way. It's like, okay, yeah, that works, but there's something very tactile. Remember, we're still human. And there's a certain sense of, I know where the keys are, I know how this feels, and even we, have preferences to certain types of keyboards for just that reason. I want that click. Sure. I want that feel of the pressure of hitting the key. So these kind of things will normalize a lot of what makes it to market and what survives. What we can do, what we can do is incredible. Uh-huh. What will actually live to be sold will be pared down rather significantly.
Okay, just like we still have radio in the internet age. Steve?
So there was a suggestion before of, how are we going to have, for example, a natural language or textual interface to Photoshop? And I think we all have seen many, many examples of a fanciful version of that, which is the one word, enhance, right? And if that's really what you want to do, and you have a system that's really capable of understanding that, that's the high-level person telling the low-level grunt who actually operates the controls, which could ultimately not have to be a human being, to go and do something that they're expressing in one very carefully chosen word, which is a sort of one-size-fits-all. And that's going to be very, very hard to do, but people are working on trying to go and give people higher-level access to the tools that would otherwise require much, much lower-level control. You can see this in many, many different applications in which we've gotten higher and higher and higher level.
Okay, I'm sorry, one more point?
Okay. One more point is that I think a lot of what we're looking at is a world in which we're going to go from a limited number of still expensive sensors and displays to a much larger number of progressively more heterogeneous and less expensive displays and interaction devices. So instead of thinking about the one or two or more cameras, perhaps including a depth camera, that are integrated with some eyewear and cover kind of the frustum in front of you, and therefore your hands have to be up over there, think about wearing more sensors so, as Noah is suggesting, your hands can be comfortably at your side or moving in front of you where your eyes are not looking and where the things on your head might not be looking. So if you're wearing lots of sensors integrated very nicely into your clothes, for example, if you're wearing lots of displays which can tickle, maybe even literally different parts of your body and communicate things to you through all of your senses and not just through your eyes and ears, then you can engage in behaviors that are much more normal. You can move your hands around like this and have your system understand it. You can glance with your eyes. You can shift your feet, for example, and have all of these things be tracked and monitored and used in a way that helps you communicate with other people better and communicate with computers better, and do it in a way that doesn't require forced actions. Just like we're talking about with eyewear, let's move away from the holding the phone and looking around kind of AR. A lot of people have happily, I've seen, started disparaging that kind of interaction. However, you also want to disparage the look around like this because I have a small field of view, or because my sensors are only on my head, to instead being able to look the way you normally would, maybe have some sensors looking behind. The cameras are getting cheaper and cheaper, and other sensors are getting cheaper and cheaper, and smaller, so I can act in a way in which has been kind of built into people to be normal and still get lots more information, systems that can help digest it, and be able to go and live our lives in ways that make us feel better about it and do better in what we do.
Okay, I want to make a point of making time for the other futurists that are part of this conversation, and that's all of you. We have a mic up here at the front. If you'd like to ask the questions directed to the panelists, we certainly have plenty more to talk about, but feel free to interject into this conversation if there's an aspect of the future of AR in society that you'd like to involve. Yes, yourself in. Joe's trying to sucker you into participating. Okay. I think I saw a question over here. I don't know if we have a mobile mic. There we go. I want to make sure that we're addressing the topics that are on your mind as well.
Hi all, it was very interesting listening to you. But what I miss is a kind of, and what Steve Penn had in his talk, was he said, I want to improve. And I want to improve life, and I want to improve the world, and I want to improve maybe, well, the natural stuff that we are having troubles with, and whatever. So it's a whole range. And what I miss a little bit, and what makes me really jump up that I want to interact with you was the last word you said, because you said like the eyes in the back. And then you said it makes us more normal. We can have more normal contact, just like what we used to do. But people don't have eyes in their back, so this will also always be something extra. And we want to use this as an extra information. So you said if we get rid of all the keyboards and whatever and wearable stuff, then we can act in and we can communicate better with people and better with computers. But making eyes in your back, how fun it will be anyhow, doesn't make anything better, I think.
Okay,
I don't see the purpose. I see the geek thing, but I don't see the purpose.
Yes. Okay, so the purpose might be if, let's say you're walking along and something bad is happening behind you, okay? Wouldn't it be nice to be able to know about that in advance?
That's on a simple level, but
Okay.
I mean on a conceptual level. Is this something, is this kind of things something that we need for making the world better and making and improve humans?
Okay, the question is for the recording, do we need this?
Rather than monopolizing the microphone. So.
Let me help because you're gonna bounce off me on this one. So let's start with a much broader scope of, let's just look at this as technology, a tool that this is what humans naturally create. This is our natural survival ability. We don't have sharp teeth. We don't fly. We build tools. So let's look at what we're currently using. We all have cars. We all have mobile phones. Cars, extensions for our legs, allow us to go farther and faster than any possible. Phones, communications, now it's cameras, it's a memory device, it's an information collection device. So keep in mind that as these technologies continue to evolve, we evolve with them, much like we could not survive for very long without a car, without a credit card, without a mobile phone. As this tech gets smaller, as it starts to become integrated with us, and sadly it's going to, it's integrated now. We have caps on our teeth, we have artificial hips, we have pacemakers, things like that, contact lenses. All of this is not us, but it enhances our life to our own choosing. Some people may choose to have eyes in the back of their head, some may not. Some may, and again, going back to my comment earlier, is once we cross into the true nanomaterial, we will become the computer. You'll take this, all your nanobots are in there, you drink it, it's powered by your bloodstream and the heat from your body, your sensors pool accordingly, and it is completely seamless, and it's personalized to you, and then it interfaces with whatever other device you see fit. So it will come down to personal choice. There will be those that say, you know what, I don't need to have that, but I need to have a certain amount to function in a modern society. And then there's going to be that sect that says, I want to be a cyborg. I want to have, I want to have adamantium bones, and I want to have artificial eyes, and I want to be able to run 100 miles an hour because I can do that. I don't think the majority of people will do that, but we will always use our tools as they are, as advanced as they can be, to just help ourselves, and then it will come down to individual choice. So I'm backing off on that.
So you all know the kind of meme about AR right now and wearables is superhero or supervillain, right? Because basically, one frame you can look at this revolution in that it's basically is enhancing a number of superpowers that we've only before seen as design fictions. And what are these superpowers? Basically, we're thinking about your other six senses or the enhancements of our senses. But you have to even go back up a frame from that. What are the senses about? The senses are about desire. And I think in my talk, I didn't really have time to elaborate on this, but there's a very interesting movement that is kind of the twin of Steve Mann's idea of personal imaging, and that is the quantified self movement. And that movement now has got into something I think which is even more interesting than that, and that is the habit design movement. And it's the last slide in my talk, so you can go back again and look, because we don't have time to go into this again. Yes, but the Nir Eyal and the desire engine, and this desire engine is well known to people like me who've been around in marketing and creating apps. This is basically why is an app like Instagram or Pinterest so sticky? Because it strings together desire engines in a brilliant way. But if you follow the Steve Mann line, it's like these desire engines need to be something people can use and customize. You need to be able to customize your own desire engine, because a desire engine or habit design is a superpower. And you can either design habits to really improve your life and make your life better, or habits can be addictive and destructive. And if you think about it, the desire engine I love, Mad Men. Who watches Mad Men? That's when the desire engine was in its early days. Don Draper is one of the first designers of the desire engine. And then we've moved to the kind of revolution I was talking about, like Pinterest and Instagram, where they kind of iterated, where they're customers and alpha and beta communities. And Steve is pointing out some of these ways we can enhance our senses, but it's not his job to have to describe all of how we design these desire engines.
Well, let's segment to at least one more question. I know the microphone's ready back here.
So this is a question that kind of addresses the evolution that you guys are describing, and the schism that may be created between sort of the developed world and the underdeveloped world, the non-developed or developing worlds. So in recent years, we've had sort of a gap in terms of education, right? So where there's access to the internet and where there isn't access into the internet. How do you see that schism when you apply it to sort of social interaction, right? So as the people are able to interact with each other in the developed world in an entirely different way, and the technology and the tools that are built around that technology are sort of aimed at that developed world and, let's say, more cosmopolitan view and the way we interact with each other. And then you have this sort of third world where they don't have access to that technology, and as we change our habits, as you say, generation over generation, how do you see that gap sort of affecting kind of, human interaction and sort of,
Okay, we're going to need to augment our desire to give a complete answer because we have less than 3 minutes before the panel times expire. So, Steve?
So, very quick answer, and that's that I think that unlike a lot of older technologies, which were very big, very expensive, it had to be, we're talking about things right now that are very, very small. If you make them in large enough quantity, they get to be really, really inexpensive, as in witness many feature phones that are essentially free with a plan, okay, and not all that expensive if you buy them without. So you're now seeing feature phones getting great market penetration in the less fortunate parts of the world. Very soon, those feature phones get replaced by things that are equal to what you have right now, a little bit after that, better than anything anyone in this room has right now. And the idea that you can make cheap technology that can do the wonderful things that we're talking about and make it so inexpensive that essentially everyone can have it, I think is really exciting, because that's not something you could have done with, for example, a car or a tractor or things that are big and bulky and very expensive to manufacture and ship.
Greg, Tish, any quick words on this subject?
You go quickly. We have to do a sentence.
All right.
This is a big question. We could do
Yeah.
Sure, absolutely.
I agree with Steve on that one, and a good model to kind of look for a comparison is look at Africa and how their culture and society has changed just with the introduction of mobile phones, and how that they use it in such very interesting hack ways. If it's now an address, it's a way to exchange currency, but that we look at that is our second generation or a much older generation technology, but to them, we just brought them forward in time 100 years like that. This will accelerate for that. So the gap will be the country that invents it, and as the United States is definitely the leader. Technologically, we're considered the inventors of the PC and all that. We're always going to be at the leading edge and beyond. But everybody else, as this gets cheaper, as it gets smaller, as nano becomes more and more commonplace, they will rise very quickly. They may not be right at the bleeding edge with us, but they won't care, because that's still science fiction to them. So, and that will create, tremendous ripple effects as far as improvement in quality of life, communication, health, and on and on.
Well, that's going to have to, sorry, be the end of our time. Obviously, the panel members are available for further conversation. I want to thank Joe Rampolla of ARDirt, the only augmented reality podcast available online, for putting this conversation together, and each one of our panelists for sharing their views. I know I learned something today. Thank you. Thank you.
A very big hand to Joe, who's there, not able to speak for himself.
Struggling through.
Augmented voice.
I hate being the guy that enforces the deadlines, but in the timeline. But it was a good conversation. I thought it flowed well.
Bit to say on it.